Hey, so welcome to another episode of the Flow Tribe podcast. So, in today's episode, I'm speaking with Heather McCurdy. So, Heather is a personal trainer. She's a fitness expert based in Montreal, Canada. And I really love this conversation for a couple of reasons. First of all, because we dive into all kinds of cool stuff about fitness, about training, about performance, but also and mostly because of how open Heather is in discussing how she's used fitness and training to help her deal with trauma, more specifically domestic abuse when she was younger, as well as sexual assault. Not only is she open to discuss her own story, but she's also made herself available to other women who may have had similar experiences and is more than willing to reach out and to help those people out, which is, I think, absolutely amazing. So I really hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. And without further ado, here's my conversation with Heather McCurdy. So Heather, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. And
Thank you for having me.
why don't we start off by just having you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Okay, so hi, I'm Heather McCurdy. I am a personal trainer over in Montreal, Canada. I've been a trainer for just over 10 years. Wow, time flies when you have to actually label how long you've been doing it. For me, movement is medicine. I love it. Not only is it my profession, but it's been a therapy for me throughout my life. So that's probably why I've been drawn into the fitness world. So yeah, I am fortunate enough. I work with all varieties of people, athletes, whether it be CFL, NFL, Women's League Pro Soccer, things like that, to lawyers, doctors, moms, and family career-given people. So I'm blessed to be able to work with such a variety of people. But yeah, so I'm a trainer from Montreal, and I've been one in the fitness world for just over 10 years.
So what brought you there? If I remember a little bit about your story, you were an athlete, right? I mean, you obviously didn't just wake up one morning and be like, I'm going to be a trainer. I feel like you kind of worked your way up to
Yeah.
that. Yeah. So what's your background? How'd you end up?
Okay, so
Yeah.
I grew up in the rural, like boonies, town of 1,000 on a dairy farm. One of those towns that you see in those movies where it's like one stoplight. So for us, it was kind of like sports was your meal ticket out. And I was fortunate enough that growing up, my mom put my brother and I in every sport, not anything specific. And then she just paid attention to whatever ones we wouldn't stop talking about. We kind of focused on those ones. So she exposed us to everything. And then what we kind of fell in love with, we kind of focused more on. So I actually started out as a competitive figure skater. So because I am 5'11", I'm kind of not your normal build for a figure skater. I'm a little bit tiny bit tall. So and I had huge growth spurts growing up that I had to go. My mom thought to save my knees, I'm going to put her with a professional. So I started seeing a trainer safely, just doing body weight stability, strengthening stuff to save my knees so I wasn't going to get injured when I was 11. So I was actually working with a trainer, just doing body weight stuff, things on BOSU and stability from the time I was 11 to like 14. And then obviously when I got older, they introduced us to weights and things like that when it was safe and the time was right. So I started out as a figure skater, and that was my meal ticket out. And that's how I got into the fitness world, because I was going to if I wasn't at the gym in the morning with my trainer, I was on the ice, and then I would go to school, and then I would play school sports, and then I would go back to the rink at night and skate. So I was always exposed to movement and sports. So it's always been a part of my life. So for me, some people find it's like work, but for me, it's just been like another daily task that I love.
And you mentioned that you worked with both athletes and I guess non-athletes, we
Yeah.
could probably call them. So what's the difference? Because I've had the same experience. I've worked with, everywhere from pro MMA fighters to like Olympic caliber athletes, and then obviously the regular person.
Yeah.
So what do you think is the main difference when you approach it? Like I think only because I think sometimes there are trainers that prefer working with the professional athlete, and then there are
Yeah.
trainers who prefer working with the non-athlete, and then there's trainers who just love the challenges of both. So what would you say is the main differences that you see when it comes to your approach?
So I think I have a reputation here in Montreal as being like tough and stern. So I think already that kind of filters out some of the clients that approach me. So usually the ones that have approached me that aren't elite athletes, they kind of have that mindset, or they probably were an athlete at one point in their life. And so they miss that component, that drive. And they find that they can't train in a way to have a goal or to push themselves to certain limits. So when they see me, I train them kind of like an athlete, even though they're not an athlete. That's just the type of clientele that usually comes to me. But trust me, I have people that are like 80 years old, and I'm doing the balance and the preventatives for later in life. But for me, I've been blessed that my clients, they all have that same mentality that they want to show up and they want to give it their all. And they're not doing it just for the now, but they're doing it for later in life. They know that it's now time to take charge, because it might be too late later, or it's going to be a lot more work later to prevent some like health issues or things later in life. So I've been lucky that there isn't really much of a difference. I find sometimes the athletes are a little bit more whinier, and they're always trying to barter and get out of certain exercises, whereas the non-athletes do what they're told. And if you're like, hey, this is the workout, they're not going to be like, so for exercise 2, can we do this instead? They're always, athletes, they're always trying to barter a little bit. So the non-athletes, they're kind of just like, they're like, I trust you. My athletes trust me too, but they just don't talk back. They're like, you know what? And then just go with it.
Yeah. So question for you, this is something that came up in another conversation I had with a trainer, where we were talking about, I guess, athletes and non-athletes, and we were talking about training for performance versus training for longevity, right? So you mentioned how, some of your clients, they're training not necessarily for right now, but really with the idea of, I want to make sure that I am also good later, right? So where's that line for you? Because I think, especially like with a lot of sports, there is a certain amount of sacrifice you're going to make, right? Yeah. You're going to train hard because you need to perform. Even if it's not the best thing for you or your body, you still have to do it because that's the sport you're in, right? And then with the average person, it's also like, whoa, we maybe need to dial back a bit because we need to think about 10 years down the road and make sure your body's still able to perform. So where's that line for you?
I feel like I'm very fortunate in the sense that the sports, like I train a lot of football players. So their periodization is kind of, it allows us, there's different mesos. So it allows you to be able to have a short-term goal, but also a long-term goal, because they want to last longer than just 2 years. They want this to be their job for a while. So you kind of have to balance a bit of both. And because of how their seasons are laid out, you have the off season and the in season. So you obviously know that in season they're getting beat up, but a different kind of beat up than what you're doing in the weight room. So I think a lot of my athletes have noticed that I don't go for 1 rep maxes or things like that. I've kind of come up with my own niche where I'm doing a lot of resistance bands, single-sided work, kettlebells, things like that. But I'm supersetting it or combining it with movements where you're going to generate the same power and explosion, but not put the same load on your joints that you've been putting it on since college or high school or even elementary school, because some people have been doing the same sport forever. So I'm traditional, but I think outside the box a little bit. And I think because of that, my athletes have been able to perform on demand for their sport, but also for longevity. Because I had one linebacker, I worked with him for 8 years. He was CFL, NFL, then CFL, and he was a linebacker. And I trained him for the last 8 years of his career. And he was balling like he was a young 25-year-old kid on the field, but he was 40. Yeah. And he's a linebacker. Most of their careers aren't even longer than 3 years or even 4. So the fact that he had lasted another 8 years after playing in the NFL, it was a mixture of both. So I find that just my style of training, I'm able to kind of find a balance somehow between the demands of now, but with longevity, just by being able to pair up movements that aren't always, I'm putting the same load on the same joints over and over and over again.
Yeah. And I think we're a lot smarter than we used to be when it comes to training, right? I think especially when we see it. I mean, you see it in hockey, you see it in football, you see it in a lot of sports, like guys in their 40s still killing it, right? Yeah. Like guys like Tom Brady,
like
and
10 sets of 10 at heavy weight all the time, where now
It just
they're
destroys your body. It destroys your
yeah,
body and you're not going to perform. Like, to be honest,
yeah,
I mean, a lot of the guys that did perform, it was mostly because of their athletic abilities and less because of
yeah,
the training they were doing in the gym. And what's interesting is even in like amateur sports. So my son recently made an attempt at football. So his first year of high school, he thought, I'm going to go out for high school football. And he's a really good athlete. He goes to this camp. The first 4 days were in the weight room destroying themselves. Like,
yeah.
this kid has never lifted a weight in his life. He's done tons of body weight stuff. He's never done heavy squats. He couldn't walk after
What
two,
I've noticed
you know,
personally
and
from me
yeah,
is like I've noticed I work with both Canadians and Americans, and the Canadians, I see a huge difference between American and Canadian mindset when it comes to the athletes, because the Canadians will sit back and listen a little bit and they want to know why. They ask questions. Whereas the Americans, since they were in elementary school or high school, they were just told, we don't care how you get that weight up. It could be, your technique could be
yeah,
disgusting and through the roof, like scary to watch. We just want you to get that weight up. It's all about the numbers. It's not about how you get it up there properly. Just get it up there. And they're so fixated on the numbers that I find that over the years of me working with the pros, I've had to kind of take their ego and be like, look, how bad do you want to ball for the rest of your life? Do you want to just ball for this season, or do you want to get more paychecks for a couple of years more down the road? So then they start to realize, I'm like, and I have to tell them, I'm like, also, you can be putting in these big numbers in the weight room, but you're not able to apply it on the field. So the guy that lifts half of what you did just blew by you or knocked you off your feet. Do you see how he's being able to apply what he's learning in the weight room? And that's a huge difference that I've seen between Americans and Canadians that I've worked with, is they have that ego that get it up, numbers. And that's what sets the difference between the longevity part sometimes of a lot of their careers. And like you said, we're smarter. We know how to do things. We know also there's more ways of doing one thing. Everyone's body is different. There's a variety. Whereas back in the older days, like in the past, it was, this is the way you're going to do it. And I find that, like, you're from your son's camp, there's still that old school mentality of just make them, like, drive them into the ground. And unfortunately, that's what's turning a lot of people off from fitness now, because they're doing that at such a young age that the kids are stopping at an even younger age because they're just like, enough, I don't want this, or they lose the passion and they don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah, and exactly what happened with my son. He quit. He's like, I'm not going, I can't walk. You know, like I get the mentality, and I think it's more about showing you football is a hard sport, and I get all of that. You know,
but there's a way to do it.
There's a way to do it. And then what I did is, because it destroyed his ego. He was like, I don't want to do this. But then what I did is, once he recovered, I'm like, all right, let's go into the gym. I have a gym in my garage, luckily. And we did it properly. And I built him up to the point where he was squatting as much as that day in his football camp and lifting as much. But we built it in a way that it took a few weeks to get there. And
but
now
he was able to walk for the next 4
and now he's
days
stronger
after.
than ever. But now he's like, football, no thanks anymore, because he just didn't like that idea of being told what to do, and just because it's not
even being told what to do, it's how they deliver the message.
And it's sad because now at the top levels, these guys know how to train. Like, if you look at the best players in the NFL, they know how to train properly, but that hasn't made its way down into the high school ranks, and even into the college ranks. I think they're still, because to them, you're kind of expendable, right? You're just one player out of 100. And if you get injured, there's someone who's going to take your place, right? So there's this weird, so you kind of have to take control of that yourself. You have to make that or have a parent who's going to do it for you, like I did, you know?
Yeah. But that's the thing too, also with like the parenting thing too, is like a lot of the mindset of the parents over there are like the old school coaches, where they're like, I don't care, just like tough it up. There are a lot of tough love, and there has to be a fine line and a balance between it. Yes, there's going to be pain and sacrifice, and you have to focus, but the delivery of it and the materials and everything, they have to kind of fine line it. And I feel like sometimes still right now we're kind of in a gray zone between the new coaches, the more modern coaches that were athletes themselves and have learned and seen through either themselves or their teammates that approach isn't for longevity. That approach isn't always the best. It's for now, but it's not for 2 or 3 seasons down the road. Or like these guys come to a point where they have to think about, I know this in university, I had two of my friends that were really talented athletes. They got drilled for years training, and then they were like, yeah, I can keep playing for 2 more years, but I'm going to need knee replacement, and I want to have kids. I don't want to be the dad that's sitting on the porch or like, yo, I'll be right there. They're like, I don't want that. So they took it into their hands, and they're like, yes, I love it, but I know later on in life I'm going to want other things, and I don't want my decisions now to hinder me from being able to be active later in life in other areas of my life, for example, with kids.
Yeah, and I think another thing a lot of young athletes don't really understand yet is the idea of recovery,
Yeah.
right? And understanding. And I think that's where a lot of the progress has been made with science, especially with sports science. It's not as much, yes, the training modalities have changed and we're much smarter than we were, but I think just the idea of recovery and how to recover has made a huge difference as to why a lot of these guys can go
They're
a lot
implementing
older.
it a lot more in the programs. They're introducing the guys to Pilates and yoga
Yeah.
and like different stuff, not just like classic stretching like that you do at the end of practice, but the guys are now doing a lot of, I mean, I always have my clients do yoga. All the football guys are all doing yoga. If they've never done it before, they're like, oh my gosh, I never noticed. And then obviously the first couple practices are a little bit of a struggle for them, and
Of course.
it's kind of an eye opener for them, but it's out of their comfort zone. But then they see the gains of how their body feels quickly, because they've been so compacted for so long that even just the 1 or 2 or 3 of those sessions, they're like, wow, I can kind of touch my toes now.
Yeah, and I
I'm
think
closer to
that's
touching my toes.
yeah, and I think we need to kind of break down those ideas like yoga, first of all, is for women, and yoga is spiritual and this
There's,
whole
yeah,
no,
they have the
it's a
stereotypical,
movement. Yeah, it's a movement practice that is designed to help your body. Like what I just did this little video this morning about my own yoga ritual that I do every morning. Yoga is what I do that allows me to do everything else.
yeah,
Right? Because after 20 years of martial arts training, my body's beat up. Like I wake up in the morning, I'm in pain. Like every
yeah.
morning, my back, my this. But then that yoga ritual, I wake up 20 minutes later, all right, I'm good.
It's
Right?
kind of
And
like, it's like the mechanic in the shop. You have
yeah,
to oil the engine and all that stuff before. It's the same thing. After you've been doing all these sports for so long, like I do, everyone's like, how do you do what you do? And I'm like, I do yoga twice a week. I make sure that I do other means of therapy too. Like I do cupping, I go to Cairo, I do stretch. I used to do like some different styles of sports therapy stretching and things like that. Like I was very open-minded to trying these things, and I could see how my body felt. And I wasn't afraid to be people being like, that's weird. But I was like, my body feels great and I'm able to perform. That's what I want. And I wasn't going with these stigmas of things, but I was more open-minded to different styles of just recovery too, which is like cupping. And I haven't done acupuncture, but like a lot of people now, the stigma is slowly being chiseled away, and people are being a lot more open-minded to trying these things.
yeah, which is so important. And I think, like, how old are you, Heather?
I'm 34.
Okay, exactly. And I think at some point, it's unfortunately age sometimes is the thing that teaches you should have listened to this advice much
You learn
earlier
later.
on. Yeah, and that was with me. Like it took me a little while to grab on at first, especially in MMA training. It's all about just like destroying your body and let's see how hard you can go. And then and you're like, yeah, I don't have time for all that recovery stuff. But then your body starts to break down a little bit, and suddenly you realize like, oh, maybe I should start paying attention to that. So luckily I jumped in maybe earlier than some
Yeah.
people, but now I'm in my 40s and I can still do a lot of the
Later, but not
things.
earlier. Like, yeah, not too late.
Yeah, exactly. And now I'm in my 40s and I can still do a lot of the things I love to do, is where I see other people my age who are just done and they've given up, and
Yeah.
it's sad. It's like, really, you've given up on your physical life because you're in your 40s? Like, come on now. Like, you got to make an effort, try something different, try a lot of what is possible.
I feel too is like sometimes age has such a stigma to it. And like for me, I've been exposed to like I'm very fortunate that have my grandfather lived to be 101. So for me, I'm always like, I'm 34. I have his genetics. Like I'm got 70 some years left, or like maybe not guaranteed, but still I have so much more of my life ahead of me. So for me, I was always a little bit more open-minded to it, just because I was exposed. And I've always just kind of, people freak out when it was like big birthdays or things like that. And for me, I was like, age is just a number. Age it's mind over matter. And I think it was just because I had the role model of my grandfather he was farming till he had his own farm until he was 87, sold his beef cows, got a girlfriend that was younger than him and started running her farm. So he was walking 6 miles every day and cutting lumber until he was 93. And the only thing that stopped him was he got shingles. And because of that, he like wasn't able to do anything. And he used to say, your type of exercise might change as you grow and go in life. But he's like, movement is what's going to keep you youthful and the longevity of your life. It like, so for him, he's like, yeah, I can't go running or anything, but he'd go walk 5 or 6 miles every day. He grew up on a farm as a farmer, so he had a physical demanding job, but he found ways where he was always moving, and he was like, movement was medicine. And it was true. As soon as he got the shingles and he couldn't walk and do things, that's when he deteriorated like rapid fire. But up until then, because he was moving, he never really realized his age. He was just like, I'm doing what I love. I'm doing this, maybe adapt or fine tune a little bit here and there. But because I had role models like that, I kind of picked up that same mindset too.
Yeah, I tell this story a lot, but I met right when I started martial arts training, I met a guy who was in his 50s and could still move like just unbelievable. The stuff he could do with his body. And I remember asking him, what's the secret? He's like, don't stop.
Yeah.
He's like, as soon as you stop, your age will catch up to you. That's when your metabolism is going to slow down. That's when your muscles are going to get weaker. But if you, he's like, even in times when I was tired or whatever, I kept stretching. I kept doing light workouts. I just kept moving. Yeah. And I think that's the idea, is there's a big difference between exercise and movement, right? Yeah. We think exercise, I got to go to the gym. I got to do these like regimented things, but movement is just go for walks, go for hikes, go for a run.
And I get something physical. Clients too. They're like, but I'm not sore after this workout. And I'm like, you don't always have to be sore after a workout. Like, they have that stigma that a workout isn't beneficial unless they can't walk the next day. And I'm like, no, that's not a sign of a good workout. Like, you're going to feel aches and pains. Yeah. After certain workouts, this and that, but not every single workout is supposed to be like that.
Yeah. So let's flip it up a bit. What's your mindset? What keeps you going? Because we've talked a lot about the physical part of training, but I think that there's also, like, if I see someone like you who's just always after it, not only for your clients, but for yourself, right? You train for yourself. So what's your mindset? What's your reasoning? What's your drive? What gets you going?
So for me, I always say that movement is like medicine, because unfortunately in my life, I've experienced traumas. So rape, domestic abuse. And I think the biggest one there was 2 big traumas. It was domestic abuse with my father when I was 18, which is like a pivotal time of my life, because that's when I was being recruited for track to go for scholarships. And this was my senior year of high school. I had stresses type thing of like the double cohort in Ontario. So that's when they were getting rid of grade 13 and 12. So 2 graduating years were going into one in such a small amount of space. And then I had a domestic attack with my father. And I think because I was an athlete, the mindset of an athlete is you never want your opponents to let you win. Like, you don't want them to defeat you. So because of the experience with my father, I knew that for some reason I had another purpose. One purpose of my life was fitness, but I had another purpose. And I think that having to overcome that experience, and then also one in university where I had a rapist break into my apartment and attack me while I was sleeping. Both of those encounters, I had the mindset from being an athlete that the environment was not my fault. The situation was not my fault. I have this purpose, but I have another purpose. So just because of these 2 situations, I'm not going to stop what I'm doing and dwell, again, feel sorry for myself or play the victim card or anything like that, because it wasn't my fault. It was just short end of the stick, not the best cards dealt, but I'm not super religious, but I just had the mindset that this is what I'm supposed to deal with now. I'm not going to have the answers as to why, maybe right now, but later in life, I'll see why. And so just because of that mindset of not wanting to stop because pursuing my goals because of those 2 situations, I had the mindset that if I stopped, I was letting both my father and the rapist win. What they wanted was they wanted to affect my life. They wanted to control me. They want control. both of those people want control over their victims. And by stopping to pursue my careers, I was letting them get that victory. And I didn't want that. So for me, movement was something that made me step by step regain things that were robbed of me in both of those situations. So I wasn't going to the gym to look pretty or this or that. It was just, it allowed me to push myself at certain manners and be like, okay, I could run this mile, I could hit this time, I could hit this set. But it was allowing me to regain confidence in myself and other areas of my life, to help me be able to keep fighting through those ordeals, but get me on in my life. And then because of being in the fitness world, I've actually encountered, I'm not afraid to talk about my story so people know about it. I've been able to help clients, their kids, their best friends get either out of a situation before it gets as bad as mine did, or help them in the next steps so that they don't stop their life journey.
Yeah.
So for me, movement was something that allowed me to regain and rediscover myself after such traumatic events.
Yeah. And I think another part of that is it's something that gives you back a sense of control.
Yeah.
Right. Like I can't control what happened to me, but I can control what happens next. And
yeah.
going to the gym and getting fit and being strong. And I think especially as a woman, having that strength, right? Committing yourself to getting strong, that's a huge amount of control that you're giving back to yourself.
And I even remember too, when the night of the rape, the police officer told my best friend, because my best friend, I remember when I called before I was being taken to like the hospital and everything, I called my one best friend. And so he rushed over to my house, and the police were talking to him, and they were like, I've always had that strong stature, that athlete stature. So the police were like, the only reason why it wasn't as bad was because I had that base of fitness. The attacker was getting bored, and he was getting more violent. So he wanted more of a challenge to have that control at the end result. And just him telling me that the next day, they were just like, that also helped me fuel the mindset to keep going and not stop, because my base was what kind of saved me. But then, like you said, it allowed me to regain the power back at the same time. So it was kind of 2 in 1.
Yeah, because I've taught quite a few self-defense workshops at this point. And one thing that I keep coming back to, and I think that's the one people have a harder time committing to, is you can go to a self-defense workshop and learn some techniques and leave, and chances are you will never practice them again. And it's kind of a waste of time, to be honest. Yeah. However, one thing I always mention is before you even talk martial arts, you should invest in your fitness, especially women, especially upper body strength. I think so many women are afraid to grow muscles. They're afraid to be too strong, that it's not feminine. And to me, it's just like, not that you're not, the risk isn't that high depending on where you live, but just having that strength is so important for so many things in life. And I think we need to, and I think that mindset is shifting. I think that there's so many amazing like female athletes now that are promoting this idea of strength, and it's okay to be strong. But I think what you were saying,
they're saying they have that hashtag strong is beautiful. Like where before it was like, I remember when I was in grade 8, I was teased because I was an athlete and I was athletic and I was muscular. Like I'm tall, I'm lanky, but I had a different stature than my peers, and I was teased for it. But now people are starting to realize, like you said, that investment is life-saving in more ways than one.
Yeah, it's life-saving from a self-defense perspective. It's life-saving. And also in self-defense, what I often teach is life is going to throw all kinds of shit at you. Yeah. It's not just someone attacking you. It could be like now, you could be in a natural disaster. You could be in some sort of physical situation where your strength is going to help you, right? Even a car accident. You could be in a car accident because you have muscles. You're not going to end up as bad as someone who is not in a good fitness situation.
You're not going to be right? You're not going to be thrown around as easily.
Exactly. Strength is just a plus in almost any situation. And I also think that now
you're going to know how to also, sorry to interrupt, but you're also going to know how with fitness or working out, you're going to have that awareness, a different awareness with your body, and you're able to control your body and in situations that others wouldn't.
Absolutely.
Like, for example, the car accident. So you can sometimes, you know, it's going to happen and you can't get out of that situation, but because you know how to adapt and you know your body, you know how to position yourself in a manner that you won't get hurt to the same degree.
Yeah. And how do you find, we talked a little bit briefly about this before we started recording, about COVID and some of the adjustments you've had to make and how you're teaching mostly online now and all that. But have you had anyone that you've noticed a shift in people paying more attention to their fitness levels because of COVID? Because to me, what I see is that, hey, this is a respiratory illness. It's been proven over and over and over that people with, you know, a better healthy lifestyle are going to have a much better chance at fighting disease or even not getting it at all versus someone who doesn't. So is that a shift that you've seen a little bit with people that you know, as far as people paying more attention to their fitness because COVID is such a big thing now?
Yes and no. I think it's also, I think our life has been so fast paced, and we always think that there's going to be a lot of tomorrows. And I think now, because COVID just kind of happened overnight, people are realizing, wow, life is short. They're like, I've always been saying tomorrow, I'm going to start tomorrow. I'm going to start next week. I'm going to start Monday. But I think now, because of A, yes, they know that it's going to help them health-wise. But B, they've realized that they've put it off for so long that they're like, no, I'm going to schedule me time, whether it be 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour. They're starting to put them some time for themselves. Whereas before, it was always my career. It was always, they were always finding something else. But now they're like, no, I need to take time for me. And they're realizing with fitness that, like you said earlier, sports teach you a lot of things. Like for me, I grew up, everyone's like, how do you do what you do? You have such a busy lifestyle, this and that. I was like, for me, sports taught me teamwork, cooperation, organization. Like, it teaches you so many components of life that, like you said, when you get thrown into a situation because of sports and such the spontaneity of like what happens in a game or this or that, you have to adapt. You have to think quick. And because of sports, it allowed me, for example, with COVID, our gyms closed on March 15th. I brainstormed the 16th. I started offering free classes the 17th, 18th, and I started my platform the 19th. And everyone always was like, how did you think of this so fast? For me, this was survival. For me, it wasn't, I wanted to make money or anything. This was survival, because I know for a fact, I want to still stay moving. Movement was what's going to keep me sane. So what am I going to do? We all have phones. We all have this. So for me, it was like common sense, whereas other people didn't really think that fast. But now they've realized, everyone was just like, I need to move, not only for my fitness, but for my sanity, to help control stress, just a whole overall wellness. They realized that, with COVID, it kind of opened their eyes to them being like, okay, I've been putting myself at the back for so long. There isn't so many tomorrows left, because literally COVID was overnight. So it's kind of a mix of both. But it's pushed those people that were making all those excuses or putting it off to finally step up. And they joke now, it's kind of like college 15, freshman 15. They're always like, it's either COVID-19 or COVID. You're either going to be in the best shape of your life when you come out of COVID, or you're going to be in the worst. And it's kind of the truth. It's kind of like your first year of university or college. Are you going to have some control and then like find a balance between enjoying life and everything else with fitness? Or are you going to just be like, screw it, I'll deal with it later? And I think they're kind of jokingly comparing it to college at the same time with that freshman 15 mindset. But it's kind of given them that push that they needed, because before they were just being like, I'll just do it tomorrow. And then tomorrow never came. And that was 3 years ago.
Yeah, and I think it's also, people actually have a little more time in some situations where suddenly I'm not going to work. I'm at home all day. And if I can, get a
my
workout
clients have
in.
said that too.
Yeah.
They're saying that I miss being real life workouts, but the fact that I can work out at home, if a meeting ends early and before I would have to pack my bag and go to the gym, I wouldn't have been able to work out, because it would have taken 45 minutes to get downtown, and then to do a workout, you don't have that much time. But the fact that it's online. And for example, me, I record my classes and I have ones morning, noon, and night, and all over the place during the day. But if they can't, they know they can message me and be like, you know what, I suddenly have a break. Do you have a recording? And then they're taking that initiative, but it's a lot more convenient. They have time, and because they're not doing the commute, they're not having to travel all the time. So it's easier for them to squeeze in 30 minutes, because before, to travel to a gym at least would be an hour. If you were to travel 15 minutes, do a 30-minute workout, then shower, and then go back to work, that's an hour. Whereas at home, a lot of my clients too are realizing they'll finish a meeting at 12:30. My class starts at 12:35. They literally are like, take the business shirt off. They have the gym gear on in the bottom because you're only seeing from the top up in the meeting. But it's that convenience where they're able to do it because of the time.
Yeah, and I think what you talked about too was that within a couple of days you converted half your apartment into basically a workout space, so you could start teaching right away. And to me, that's not just the sign of a good trainer; it's a sign of a good entrepreneur. I think that you had that mindset of like, okay, this is happening, and I think a lot of people took way too much time to get over the fact that it was happening, and they were
fighting. I also know we're creatures of habit.
Yeah, and I'm not criticizing anyone. I think everyone's having a really hard time with this, and I have so many friends in the fitness industry who've suffered because of this. But I think a lot of people fought it for so long, blamed the government, blamed COVID, blame. Meanwhile, life's happening. Meanwhile, there are trainers out there who are kicking ass. Trainers who realize like, okay, well, guess what? I can't do things the old way. Let's try something else. And I even know some people who've created these online platforms that are so amazing that they are doing better business now with that than they were with their gyms or their studios. And then their studio reopens. Now they have 2 successful businesses. Yeah. Right. So there's a way to make it work.
And for me too, I was just like, we're creatures of habit. So like you said, you don't want to wait too long, or it's going to be harder to get back on the wagon. So that's why I started right away. And when I first started, I was like, no, let's be honest. It was before the wave of the surge of everyone buying their own equipment and starting to supply things in their house. So when I first started teaching classes, I told people, I was like, you have a carry-on suitcase, right? We all have a carry-on suitcase. They're like, yeah. And I was like, go fill it with some stuff. And they looked at me kind of funny. And I was like, hey, you can squat and press this. You can deadlift this. You can bend over, row it. And I made them think outside the box. I was using my couch. I was using suitcases. I had clients that were doing gallon water jugs, but they were thinking outside the box, and they were like, wow, this is the same thing as a dumbbell, or this is the same thing as a bar. So it allowed them to break that mindset that you have to have just this equipment. And if you don't have this equipment, you can't work out. But I was, like you said, I was able to adapt, but also adapt fastly, that it didn't disrupt their already existing routine that they had with being active.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love the idea of a suitcase. I've always been about that. I think that people overestimate the importance, and it's not, again, gyms are important. I think people need a place to go to, but it's not, if that's what stops you, like if you can't get to the gym is the reason you don't work out at all, then you need to realize like there are so many other ways to do it. And I think that often those people that don't get to gyms, maybe this is the catalyst they needed. They realize like, hey, I can do this at home. Yeah. And then once gyms reopen, maybe I'm in better shape now and I'm less embarrassed to go to the gym, or I'm more motivated to go to the gym and to try something more challenging.
And right? I've had a lot of clients too say that because of the COVID, they're like, yeah, at first it was an adjustment, getting used to being on a screen or being at home. But they're at the same time, they're either realizing, they're like, yeah, when things do reopen, I'm going to do both. Like I'm going to I have the base to do stuff at home now because I know I can. And then when there's certain things that I like, if I want to go spin, like things that you can't do at your house, they're like, I'm going to go out and do it. But they're like you said, they're like, I can do the basics at home. And like my theme this summer, like for all of COVID, from spring till the end of summer, until recently, until it got really cold, I was shooting all my content in an empty parking lot alley behind my apartment building. So I was keeping my workouts that I was filming for content just to give people ideas with either dumbbells, my body weight. Like I was using curbs by the parking, like where you park your car, like ramps going in, like the under ramps going under apartment buildings. I was showing people that you can use this stuff. It's not your stereotypical classical gym jump box, but you can do your step ups on it. You can do all these other things. And I was showing them that there was more ways to get around it to get the same job done.
I mean, you even have videos of you working out in your hallway of your
Yeah.
apartment building, which I think is awesome. I keep waiting for someone to walk by and be like, I'm guessing your neighbors know who you are at this point and they know to expect that there's going to be.
And I'm like very quiet. So
Yeah.
like when you know how, like we said earlier, when you are in fitness and all of this stuff, you know how to maneuver your body, this and that. So I'm light on my feet. Like I film those videos at like right after my 7 a.m. class. So it's usually sometimes 7:45, 8 a.m. It's too early. I can't be like waking some of these people up.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I do it when I know it's quiet, but I also am respectful for my neighbors so I don't piss anyone off.
So where do you see this heading? I know Montreal had a bit of an up and down situation where gyms started to reopen, and then the surge happened. And I think that's happening everywhere. Like the states are a mess. And again, I it's people are doing, I think, the best they can.
Yeah.
And not knowing where COVID is going to end up for you and your business. And I'm asking this because I know a lot of people in the fitness industry, and I feel like you've kind of figured it out a little bit, at least as far as where we are now.
Yeah.
Where do you see it going afterwards now that you have this kind of online thing that's kind of, online pretty successful so far? And then obviously you're going to want to get back to the real world. And
I feel like from what I've heard
from
my clients right now, because even when we had the gyms reopen, they didn't want to go back. They basically have all been saying, it also depends on your gym. Like if you're more of a small studio, they didn't really feel comfortable. But if we were like, for example, the old MA before it was like, it's in Renos right now, but it was a big space, more of a warehouse. So they're like, okay, I feel more comfortable going to a bigger space because there's more places for me to go around. Not everyone's going to be there at once. But when it comes to the smaller spaces, they were like, no, not ready. Like, I don't want to be around people in a certain space. Yes, you have to do your social distancing, but they were more open-minded if it was outside or if they knew it was more of a warehouse style big gym. But when it came to more the smaller boutiques and things like that, they were like, I'm okay. I'm going to wait at home. And just from what I've been hearing from a lot of my clients is even when they'll reopen the first time, they all stayed inside. And now is the same. They're getting a little stir crazy. So they're like, okay, when it's nice days, I'll go outside or I'll go do one class that I can't do at my house. But I think the future now is online. And I think some of the trainers that you said, you even said it earlier, not everyone jumped on board right away. And it was because a lot of people still have the mindset that the old normal is going to come back. And it's not. I hate to say it, but that is never going to be the same as what it was. We can come close to it, maybe years down the road and also when there's a vaccine. But for right now, at least for the next 2 to maybe 3-5 years, it's going to be, everyone says online.
Yeah, I don't know. I think so too. I think, again, it all depends on, I think in the summer.
It comes on where you're from too.
It depends on where you are. It depends on your mentality. But I think also like here in LA where gyms can have open spaces, they can have outdoor spaces, people can train outside all the time. There was less
seasonal,
of a,
right?
Yeah. And then, in Montreal, as soon as winter hits, there's no more outside workouts. Right.
Yeah.
So then it's like, but even then, are you willing to go into a space with people? And I think some people are craving it and other people are like, you know what, I'm doing just fine at home.
People that I feel like, I think they used to think a larger percent of the people were craving to go back. But I think just because I think with this second lockdown too, it's hitting closer to home. Before you were hearing stories of people with COVID that you kind of knew, or like it was of a friend who lost a loved one, unfortunately, or this or that. But with this second wave, it's people they know. It's like, wow, I just saw this person like a month ago, they passed away. Like it happened even yesterday. One of my clients, she was like, my aunt passed away. Her aunt is maybe like 5 years older than me. Like she's young. Like she's not that old. And she didn't even have COVID for long. It just hit her. And so I think it's hitting people closer to home now. And because they're realizing it affects people to a degree at a different level, they're not really willing to play Russian roulette with it. They're like, you know what? I'll stay online for right now. And depending, like we said, if we were in LA where it's seasonal and you can be outside all the time, it for sure would be a lot different mindset. But because we're confined for at least 4 to 5 months of the year, I think at least for the next 4 to 5 months, they're going to prefer virtual.
Yeah, and I think what you just said makes so much sense is that until you know someone that it happened to, and for me, it was really early on. I think it was maybe a few weeks into the whole lockdown thing starting, and which was what, March, April, right? And I was on Facebook, and this guy I know who was a Muay Thai teacher that I taught with in Brooklyn when I was living there, who was my age, just as fit as me, just as, health conscious as me, and he didn't pass away from it, but he got it and he got sick. And he
Yeah.
put this full detail of what those 2 to 3 weeks looked like for him. And he's like, this was rough. And
Yeah.
any ideas that you have that this is just old people that are at risk or whatever, he's like, man, if I wasn't healthy, I don't know what would have happened. Because
It would have been way worse, or he wouldn't
he's
be
like,
here.
this was rough. And his detailing of it was like, that could easily be me. And I
Yeah.
don't want that. So right away, I was like, you know what? If I don't need to go somewhere, I'm just not going to go. Right. I
Yeah.
have a good, like, I'm really lucky that we have a big backyard and, I have a gym in my garage, and it made it easier to stay home. I'm
Yeah.
thinking people who live in small apartments and all that must, it's a whole different situation.
Yeah.
But I mean, at the end of the day, it's your health, it's your life,
Yeah.
like how much are you willing to risk for what, for
Yeah.
something that
And
maybe you can do at home. And
for me, I was the same way too. It was like I had two clients and a girl I went to university with. She's runs for Team Canada, but she's also a nurse. I was seeing her posts. I was hearing stories from my two clients. I was seeing them being burnt out, overloaded, and like sacrificing and putting their lives at risk every day going. I was like, they're about to burn out, and we're like not even 2 months in. I was like, I just don't want to be a contributing factor to their burnout. So for me, it was like, no, I'm going to stay home. I'm going to follow the protocols, this and that. And it was just because I had their view on it. And then I had like friends that were athletes in the States kind of get it. And they were like, you know how you breathe normally? Every time I breathe, I would have the chills and this and that. And it was kind of like your friend for 3 weeks. They were like, rough is an understatement, and words can't describe. Like, I can describe to you what it felt like, but that doesn't do it justice. And I was like, you know what? I just don't want to experience this. I don't want to be like, you were right. So it comes down to like,
yeah, and it's personally not wanting to get sick, but it's also understanding that the less people that go out, the less chances there are of this thing spreading, right?
exactly.
And it sounds, like I do my part by staying home, especially if people in the medical in the medical world, people who work in hospitals, and those people don't have a choice; they have to go out. There are so many essential workers that have to go out and do their work. And I think, if I can stay home and make sure that I'm one less person who's out there contributing to the problem, then that's what I'm going to do. Right.
Yeah.
So.
And I even had, there's a young Montrealer here. He's a doc. He was a year or two younger than me. He played for Kansas City Chiefs. He went from Super Bowl winning.
Yeah. No, I know who he is.
To working
What's
front
his
line.
name? Yeah.
Laurent.
Yeah.
I don't know him personally, but I was just reading his articles and things like that and interviews. And just like things like that, where you can, like, he literally went from one spectrum to the other. And then he was explaining what he was encountering during the days. At the same time, it's like, no, that's another avenue I just don't want to experience. I'll stay home. Like, I don't want to be a contributing factor, like I said before, but at the same time, it's like, this is real. And a lot of people are thinking it's just the flu or a version of the flu or this or that. But there's so many unpredictable, like I think it was one of my coworkers, her friend was one of those scientists that were working on a vaccine. And she said to us in one of our staff meetings over Zoom that we had, was this thing was mutating so strongly and aggressively that even if we do come out with something, it'll mutate. And that's what they're realizing now with this second wave, that it's already starting to change a bit. So I was like, I just don't want to take anything. And I'm like, and working in the fitness world, my life is my lungs. So if I have issues breathing, because there's going to be damage done to my lungs after, it's going to affect my career afterwards. So I was like, I just don't want it to affect. It affects you in so many different levels when you work in this industry too, that I'm like, I just don't want to chance it.
Yeah. Well, Heather, this was amazing. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for taking the time. So how can people connect with you? I know you have tons of really cool stuff online, and I'll make sure to put this all in the notes and
Oh,
stuff like that. But why don't you let people know where they can find you?
all right. So my IG handle is McCurdy86, MCCURDY86. That's where all my stuff is. I'm in the middle of redoing my website, so I don't have that just yet,
Okay.
but it'll be posted on my Instagram. So if you look on my
Awesome.
Instagram, don't be shy. You can DM me. And if you have questions or anything regarding what I feel about fitness, like I said, with my past when it comes to domestic abuse, rape, things like that, I am here for you. I'm an open book. So if you need questions, resources, or anything like that, I'm here for you.
I just want to take an extra minute to thank you for that. I think that there are so many women, and I think this whole past couple of years has been all about women and all about women empowering themselves, empowering each other. And I think it's amazing that people like you are willing to be open about those experiences, because I think it happens to way more people than we think.
Oh,
But I
for
think
sure. Yeah.
so many people just aren't willing to open up about it. So thank you for doing that on behalf of whoever needs that help, right? Because I think it's important, and I think that people need to see someone like you and know, like, oh, it happened to you, and somehow you made sense of it. So maybe there's hope for me too. You know?
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
you just
amazing.
have to. It's just one of those things where it's like one person's story. Like the quote says, "You never know who's watching."
Yeah,
That you're inspiring.
yeah,
So at the same time, I used to apply that to my life and just be like, I never know who's watching me.
yeah.
So like, yes, I'll have my bad days or my struggles or this and that, but I'm going to just keep moving. I'm going to keep trucking. It might not be as fast as yesterday, but
Yeah.
I'm going to keep going forward.
Amazing. So on that, I think we'll end it there. So thanks again, and we'll talk
Thank
soon.
you. All right. Sounds good.